Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So the Anbernic RG552 is recently for sale. I don't have it in my possession yet, but I'm hoping to have it here in the next week or so, and as soon as I get it, I'm going to do an impressions video, and then later on I'll do a review as well. Now, the introductory retail price of this device is $227. Now that's a hefty price, at least in my opinion. That is a serious investment when it comes to retro handhelds. So I wanted to take a little bit of time today and just talk about some of the other devices around that price point that are in the market or coming to the market soon. And so my goal with this video is to help you make a little bit more of an informed decision by at least laying things out so that you can understand what the market looks like right now. Now, the only device that's really available right now is the PowKiddy X18S. And I've done a few videos about this. I have a love and hate relationship with this little device. Now, the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus will be coming out in the next month or so, and I have the original Retroid Pocket 2 here at least, so we can get a feel for the size and the screen dimensions and things like that. So we'll take a look at this one as well. And of course, the AYN Odin was supposed to release last month in November, but obviously it didn't show its face. But all the same, it's still underway, and who knows when it's going to actually ship. My guess would be, my gut reaction is going to be sometime in February of 2022. Now, with any conversation of a device that costs around the $200 price point, I do think that the PS Vita should be included as a factor. This thing sells for about $200 on the used marketplace in the US right now, but it still has a lot of potential. It can play the entire PS1, PSP, and PS Vita library, but on top of that, it can also do Nintendo 64, a bunch of indie games and ports, and it can play your retro games, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, things like that. So this should be part of the conversation too. So my hope with this video is to keep it under 10-15 minutes, but you know me, I like to explain every little thing, so maybe just buckle up and we'll see how long this takes. Anyway, let's get to it. Okay, since the Anbernic RG552 is coming out today, I figured this is probably the best place to start. Now, this device, like I mentioned, costs $227, and they've made a lot of improvements from the previous model to this one. They have a much bigger screen, a more powerful chip, HDMI out, active cooling, as well as wireless charging and quick charging. So for all intents and purposes, this device is a huge upgrade from the RG351 series. But the price itself is quite an upgrade too. We're talking $100 more than a lot of the other models. But there are some features that are pretty exciting to me. Number one is the fact that it dual boots into both Android and Batocera. The Batocera part in particular is interesting to me. I'm also looking forward to trying out this touchscreen, which has a 5:3 aspect ratio, which is a little bit less wide than 16:9. I think that's going to fare well for retro gaming. And honestly, Anbernic is promoting this as basically the next big thing, that it can do any and everything that you ask of it. But I have some reservations about that. If you look at its benchmark scores, the single thread rating is under 1,000. And I'm not really sure how that's all going to play out until I have the device in my hands, but honestly, those specs are kind of lousy. This chip is from 2016, so it's like 5.5 years old at this point. So my hope is that we'll get pretty good PSP, Nintendo 64, and Dreamcast performance, and I think that GameCube is really going to be a stretch. But the thing about Anbernic is they make really high quality devices, and they also have a large following. So despite having a comparatively weaker chipset, the sheer amount of community behind this may actually get some pretty good optimizations for the entire device. But at $227, the price to performance is a really hard sell. So I really hope that hardware makes up for it. Anyway, we'll probably find out in about a week or so. So now let's focus on a device that actually is already on the market, and this is the PowKiddy X18S. Now, this device costs $170, but it does have its own share of problems. And I've talked about it a lot, but you know, the D-pad, the analog sticks, and the face buttons all have issues right out of the box. And so if you are going to get this device, I would just plan on spending about $30 to $40 in order to upgrade the hardware as well as the software. And I have videos on how to do all of that here on this channel. But after you dedicate quite a lot of time and energy into this, it does become a pretty powerful machine. The upgraded and stable operating system of Lineage OS does improve performance, and this is a pretty powerful chip. This is going to be able to eat through most PSP games at a 3x resolution, and even the harder ones like God of War can play at a 2x resolution. And I would say you can probably play about half of the GameCube catalog if you use the right ROMs and emulators. It does take some tweaking, but you can get some pretty good results. And even some PS2 is manageable on this device. It's not running at full speed for most games, but some of the lighter games like Kingdom Hearts can play well. And if you're willing to live with a little bit of slowdown, you can play other games like Grand Theft Auto 3 or even Final Fantasy X. And this device works pretty well as a streaming machine as well. So altogether, as being one of the more budget-friendly devices in the next generation of consoles, this is pretty good. But to be honest, the hardware and quality control issues do give me a little bit of pause. Now, the most budget of the new generation of handhelds is going to be the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. Now, this comes out later on this month, and you can get the device for $99, or you can upgrade an existing Retroid Pocket 2 for $65. I should mention that Retroid adds another $20 for shipping, so expect to pay about $120 altogether for this device. But, they get a lot of things right with this one. They've got a lot of different color options available, and the chipset in here is much improved from the original Retroid Pocket 2. It also has a touch screen as well as improvements to the face buttons and D-pad. But that being said, no one really has their hands on this one yet. The only YouTuber that has tried it out is AYN Odin, and he's mostly been using engineering builds. But all the same, he's showing some pretty good performance. Not quite as good as the X18S, but it's still able to run Nintendo 64 really well, as well as a smattering of GameCube games. Now, the other day, I bought the purple Funtastic version of the Retroid Pocket 2 because I'm going to put in that new PCB into this model. I really like this transparent purple look, and this one isn't offered with the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, so I'm basically going to make a Frankenstein machine. But all in all, the Retroid Pocket 2 is a decent machine. It's light and plasticky, but I kind of like that with my handhelds. The D-pad and face buttons are too clicky and shallow for my tastes, but they're going to be replaced with the new PCB kit, and so in that case, hopefully they're going to be much improved. Now, unfortunately, the right analog stick is still going to remain a slider in the upcoming models, and that's kind of a bummer. Same thing with the left analog stick. This one unfortunately doesn't click down, and I'm not sure if that new one is going to. So there are going to be some compromises when it comes to the controls, but all in all, I'm excited about this new model. Now, this has a 4x3 display at 3.5 inches, and that typically is going to work well all the way up to the 32-bit era, but as we start getting into things like Lite GameCube, I'm worried that this is not going to be a big enough screen to be able to read the text comfortably. So we'll see how that all plays out with the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, and I'll be sure to review it as soon as I get a unit. But I'm pretty excited about this one in terms of price per performance. And the stack shoulder buttons on this device really can't be beat. They're really handy. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This is the AYN Odin. Now, like I said, this device was supposed to release last month and this month, and as you see, it is not available yet. It comes at 3 different price points, $199 for the Odin Lite, and then $240 for the Odin Base, and then $289 for the Pro model. Bear in mind that it costs about $30 shipping for this too, so you have to tack on an additional $30 to get it to your house. Now, when it comes to performance, this device seems to be performing really well. This is another one of those where not a lot of people have actually touched this device, but if you go to the AYN YouTube page, they have all sorts of showcase videos that you can watch. And in general, I'm pretty excited about the emulation possibilities on this device. You can see it's running 3DS really well, GameCube, Android games, all of them seem to run really well, especially for this price point. Now, this device is still in the planning and development stages. It's nowhere near production yet, and so it may be some time before we actually see this on the market. Right now, it sounds like they're planning on a January release, but we'll see how that all plays out. Either way, this device has a lot of potential. It's Android-based, but it has a dock that you can plug it into, and between the 3 different models, I think the Odin Lite is actually going to have the best value. It has a pretty good chipset, as well as Wi-Fi 6, which will make it really good for streaming, and so that's the one I'm actually the most excited about. And the Odin's gotten a lot of attention. It had almost 2,500 backers, nearly $750,000 invested into this project. But there's still a part of me that's worried about whether or not they're going to deliver in the first place, so we'll just keep our eyes on this one for now. And for the 2,500 of us who have already invested into the project, I sure hope that we get our device. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. This is the GPD XP. Now, this one is mostly marketed to the Chinese market. You can see here that it has 3 different controller modules attached to it. But to be fair, the majority of Westerners are probably only going to be interested in the Xbox controller module itself. Now, this device has a very large screen, 6.8 inches, and it has a pretty good cell phone chip, but a little bit on the older side. Honestly, this device is basically just a phone with controllers attached to it. It even has the camera hole punch still on the device itself. So if you wanted a dedicated device for gaming instead of trying to use a phone, this might be a good bet. That being said, they're asking about $325 for this device. And honestly, the price to performance on that is pretty terrible. I mean, you could buy a much more powerful phone and put a controller on it for that same price. More on that here in a minute. Now, it does have some advantages. You can use a micro SD card in order to load up a bunch of your games. And it does have a hefty battery as well. But all the same, for a device that is basically just a smartphone, this price is kind of insane. And I'm hoping to get my hands on a review unit at some point, but for now, the best source of review footage is actually the Fox here on YouTube, and I'll leave a link to him in the video description. And you know, his assessment I think is kind of spot on. He calls this a console companion. The emulation itself is not that great on this. It can do some GameCube games, but not a lot. But what he really likes it for is Xbox cloud gaming and things like that, where it's basically resuming games that you can't play on your TV at any given moment. So if I do get a unit, I'll do a review, but for now, I think this one is going to be a pass. Now, like I said, you could probably do this for a lot cheaper if you use a phone. And so for this video, I actually did that very thing. This phone here is the LG V60. LG recently left the cell phone space, and because of that, many of their phones are on discount right now. So for $250, I got this phone, and then I attached it to the GameSir controller, which can be anywhere from $50 to $70. And so for about $320, I have a really good performing smartphone. The chipset is a Snapdragon 865, and as you can see here, it's running PS2 no problem. This is actually at 2x resolution here, and it's just cutting through God of War, one of the hardest games to play on the PS2. And so I think this says a lot, right? For $320, you can play PS2 at 2x resolution on a device that costs about the same amount as the GPD XP, which could only play a few GameCube games. And make no mistake, this device can also play GameCube at a 2x or even a 3x resolution depending on the game. Now obviously this isn't the only smartphone that can do this. Any phone that has a Snapdragon 865 or higher chipset is probably going to do really well. You might actually have one in your pocket. And as much as I don't like using a phone for my primary handheld device, you really can't argue with the results here. And the nice thing about a lot of these smartphones is that they have really good Wi-Fi as well. So for example, you can do things like Steam Link. Here I'm playing Hades, and it's having no lag at all running from my computer. And on top of that, you could jump into the world of cloud gaming with Stadia or GeForce Now or Xbox Cloud Gaming, which I'm using here with Forza Horizon 5. The only bummer about this controller is that it doesn't have analog triggers, so for games like this, when it uses an analog input with the trigger functions, it is a bit of a compromise. And so this isn't a perfect solution, but man, this screen and just the overall performance is pretty impressive. Now, even more impressive is the upcoming Steam Deck. This retails from $400 up to $650, and this basically is just a handheld PC. But at this price point, at $400 for the entry price, this is a really powerful machine. It has a 7-inch 720p display, and at those settings, it's going to be able to play a lot of AAA PC games directly on your device. And because it syncs up with your Steam account, you're going to be able to access your entire library seamlessly, and that's going to be a really interesting prospect. Now, unfortunately, this device has also been delayed, and now they're shipping at February 2022 at the earliest. But all the same, I'm pretty excited to see how this one plays out. One of the nicest things about it is that the console is going to be very open to development. And so because of that, we're going to be able to put different operating systems onto SD cards and then load them that way. And so my hope is we'll be able to run Batocera on this, which is going to give us an emulation station type interface, and with this nice hardware, it might be a really good emulation gaming experience. Just based on specs that we've seen from other computers with similar chips, we're looking at up to PS3 emulation. That's pretty exciting. But there are some things to think about. For example, this thing is quite a beast in the hands. This is a very large device, much bigger than something like the Nintendo Switch. But all the same, this is the only device we're showing off in this video that can actually function as a computer as well. And so I think when it comes to the value altogether of being able to use this as a pretty good everyday computer as well as a gaming machine, this price really can't be beat. Okay, a couple more things to show off here. I want to talk about the PlayStation Vita a little bit just because we're talking about that $200 price point. And despite the fact that this device came out almost 10 years ago at this point, it's still a really good value today. Now, to be fair, a couple years ago would have been the best time to get it because back then they were selling for about $100. But now that demand for the PS Vita has crept up, now the prices are about $200 to $220, at least here in the United States in the used marketplace. Now, once you hack this device and enable it to play homebrew, it opens up an entire world of gaming. In addition to playing backups of your favorite PS Vita games, which look incredible on this 5-inch display, you'll also find that a lot of beloved indie games have made their way onto this console as well. Things like Shovel Knight and Iconoclasts. And once you have the device unlocked, you'll be able to install RetroArch, which will allow you to play up to Super Nintendo with minimal problems. And on top of that, there is now a Nintendo 64 emulator, which runs pretty well. And I have videos on how to get all of this running here on this channel. And the Nintendo 64 emulation is not the best, it still has some hiccups, but it is relatively good. Additionally, the homebrew community has been hard at work in porting over other games, so for example you can play the PC port of Grand Theft Auto or Bully, and they also have the standalone Super Mario 64 and Sonic ports available on this device too. Now, one of my favorite things about the PS Vita is that it can basically run a PSP environment inside of this machine, and it runs really well. So if you're a huge PSP fan, then the PS Vita is going to be a great option for you. My only hesitation is that the Vita is twice the resolution of the original PSP, and these games don't upscale to the native PS Vita resolution. There is a plugin you can use to fix a couple games, but for the most part, you're going to be stuck with a 1x resolution on a screen that's built for twice as many pixels. And what that means is despite running really well, some of these games are going to look a little bit muddy just because they're lower resolution. God of War is a great example here. It plays really smooth, but it's not as beautiful to look at. Now, the last console I want to mention is the Nintendo Switch Lite. This also costs $200, and the hardware is pretty good, but the software catalog on this is incredible. I think there's something like 6,000 games now available on the Nintendo Switch between the downloadable indie games as well as all of the cartridges you can buy too. And on top of that, if you pay an additional $20 a year, you can have access to the Super Nintendo and Nintendo emulation consoles. Now, the catalogs on this are pretty slim, but all the same, if you want to play some of the classic Nintendo and Super Nintendo games on this device, you can do that for $20 a year. And I recently just bought this Nintendo Switch, and I've been really enjoying it. Honestly, I never really liked playing the original Switch in handheld mode, mostly because I didn't like the way the Joy-Cons felt like they weren't attached to the device itself. But putting it all together into one seamless console like this does make it a very nice experience. I've been enjoying this Switch a lot more than I expected to. So if, like me, you're a big fan of Nintendo games, this might be a good option as well, especially if you want to dig into that Nintendo Switch catalog. Of course, it's kind of apples and oranges with a lot of these emulation machines, but all the same, I did want to mention it because of that price point. Okay, so wrapping things up here, I ended up making a table just to put all this data together. And this is my price to performance comparison, and this is totally arbitrary, but this is at least what I came up with. Now, these devices are listed from cheapest to most expensive, and I've also given them a performance rating. And the measuring stick I used for the performance column is basically based on GameCube and PlayStation 2. If it could play those systems at a native resolution for most of the catalog, then it deserved an A. And then, of course, if it can play them upscale, then I would give it an S. And anything below those two systems, I gave it something lower. And of course, in that final column, I have the overall value. And this is basically taking into consideration the price, and then the performance, as well as any other features that are unique to the device. And so naturally, these things just kind of fell out into 3 different tiers based on the different price points. For around $100, the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus is an incredible value. It's not going to be able to play every GameCube or even PS2 game very well at all, but all the same, for $120, once you factor in shipping, that's a really good value. Now, moving up to that next tier, I think the Odin Lite is going to be a pretty good value. At $229, you're going to see a good amount of GameCube and PS2 games playable. And on top of that, this one has really nice features like Wi-Fi 6 for streaming and analog triggers. Now at that $300-ish price point, I think your best bet right now at least is to actually just get your own phone and then a telescopic controller. As we saw earlier, the price to performance is pretty good. It really is going to depend on the phone, and currently I recommend the LG V60. I've been really enjoying it. And then finally, if you're willing to shell out $400+, the Steam Deck is going to be an incredible value. And that is a huge price commitment, but all the same, it's going to outclass all of these devices with no problem. And really, the only other competition for the Steam Deck are going to be other handheld computers like the AYN Neo. And even those, the price per performance is nowhere near close to the Steam Deck. They're obviously selling the Steam Deck at a loss, and that's obviously going to shake up the industry. And as a guy who's very budget-minded, I'm really excited for that prospect. Alright everyone, this is about it for this video. I really appreciate you sticking around to watch it, and I hope it's been helpful when it comes to making a decision about which next generation handheld is going to be best for you. At the end of the day, none of these are perfect, and they each have their own compromise. But all the same, I think you have some pretty good options when it comes to your budget, anywhere from $100 to $400. Now, as time marches on, I expect that these dynamics are going to change significantly. For example, we may continue to have a chip shortage, which may raise prices or delay devices even further. But all the same, I'm excited to see what 2022 is going to have in store for us. So let me know in the comments below, which device are you most excited about? And be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. And we will see you next time. Happy gaming.